Welcome to With Love, the Chambers.
Where life, laughter, and lasting lessons meet.
We're the Chambers, a husband and wife navigating faith, family, and everything in between.
Here we share real stories, heartfelt conversations, and a whole lot of love. Because life isn't perfect, but God's grace sure is.
So pull up a seat, grab a cup of coffee, or go ahead and sip that tea, and join us for honest talks, laughs, and the wisdom we're learning along the way. This is With Love, the Chambers.
Well, welcome to another episode of With Love, the Chambers. We're so excited that you found this channel, you found this platform, and you found these smiling faces today. We're really excited about the conversation that we're about to have. But let us introduce ourselves. My name is Rufus Chambers.
And I am Jamila Chambers.
And this is, again, With Love, the Chambers. As we get ready to dive into today's conversation, we invite you to hit the like button, hit the share button, drop some comments. If you're viewing or listening on a platform in which you can add comments, help us get the word out that there's a new podcast in town, in these global internet streets, and we have something to say. The mic is on, all right? So today, Jamila, I'm excited about a conversation that we are about to have.
Yes.
We're going to talk about one of our favorite conversations, and that is LOVE.
Yes.
And I feel like we're going to have a conversation in a very noisy time in culture as it pertains to marriage and as it pertains to relationships. As you know, I am now an official TikTok connoisseur.
You are.
So I am often in these TikTok streets. I'm also an avid YouTuber, always looking for sound bites of information. And when I scroll and look for content relating to love and relationships and marriage, some of the information that I see out here is concerning because I feel like a lot of people have lost faith in the institution of marriage, in the institution of family, and even in the institution of meaningful, committed relationships. You know, now people talk about open marriages and open relationships and, you know, polygamy and all these terms that are like, wow. I mean, and people they're not only doing it, but they're making very strong arguments for them. In our news cycle recently, Paul Pierce, the Hall of Famer, the retired NBA player, he made a statement that I personally found ignorant in saying that marriage is for old people and marriage is for poor people. And, you know, when I hear things like that, it's concerning because I think about the future of our community, the future of our family legacy. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on where we're at in today as it pertains to marriage, as it pertains to relationship. How did we get here, and how can we help some people self-correct?
Where we're at today, we are having this conversation because in your TikTok streets, you came across the red balloon poppers.
The red balloon poppers.
You came across the red balloon poppers several months ago. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that have not experienced that on TikTok, it is a show where on site, there will be one person that has several suitors in front of them. Mm-hmm. And those suitors on site will determine, and it could be male or female, will determine whether or not they want to date the person simply based on them walking into a room and really not saying much about themselves. Yeah. And so one of the things that's very difficult with watching that exchange is you're watching people that are of age to have meaningful relationships that might blossom into marriage. Mm-hmm. You are watching people that are career individuals. Many of them have multiple degrees and are educated. But when it comes to relationship, they're saying on site,
Yeah.
Based on me looking at you before you've said a word, I am going to make a determination as to whether or not you're
Yeah.
someone that I would like to get to know better.
Yeah.
And so when it is the challenge, and when we say, well, where we are today, there is something to be said. There is that show and there's that manifestation of it, but there's something to be said about people not taking the time
Yeah.
to invest in getting, just as friends, just
Yeah.
outside of relationship, but just
Absolutely.
taking the time to invest in getting to know someone, to get to hear their story, to learn more about just their background and what brought them to a place or to a space. And so when we start talking about just having a meaningful relationship to begin with, we are doing a really good job at being friends
Yeah,
with
that's
one
true.
another and making an investment in getting to know one another. So when we talk about what are some of the initial barriers and where we are today in terms of just developing into a meaningful relationship, I don't even like the way they look.
Yeah.
And I don't even like where they come from. Now, don't get me wrong. You and I had some of that back in the 1900s.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
don't
yeah,
get me
yeah,
wrong.
yeah,
Don't
yeah.
get me wrong.
Attraction is a part,
Yeah,
yeah, for
attraction is
sure.
a very big part of it, and connection is a very big part of it. But why do you think we aren't even getting beyond that initial stage
Yeah.
of, let me just take the opportunity to get to know who you are, even
Yeah.
without the expectation of anything more?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question because I feel like it's partially related to something we've talked about on a recent episode and people being so self-absorbed.
Yes.
It's funny when people get self-absorbed and, sometimes they may be branded as narcissists or moving in narcissism. And I don't believe every person is a narcissist, but sometimes some of the symptoms are you can be so self-absorbed in yourself that, you're viewing people and other relationships solely through you being so absorbed and wrapped up in yourself. It's interesting. Sometimes people, they build an entire life on their singleness.
Yes.
And it's impossible for them to leave that little kingdom. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate. And, thinking about the Red Balloon show, I don't even know what it's called.
I don't know the name of it either.
But it disappoints me to see people so shallow that you're going to judge a person so prematurely and so immediate based on, their clothes or based on their shoes or based on their cologne or based on their haircut or based on their hair. And I'm like, wow, if people are making such an immediate, hasty judgment, that relationships are in trouble, because you and I know, back in the day, blind dates was a real thing,
Yes.
right? You would just pull up and
Yes.
see, well, you know what?
Yes.
Or you go somewhere and your friend's dating somebody and their friend gonna be there. Okay, I'll be open.
just go.
I'll just be
I'll
open.
just go.
And there was no, well, let me go check out their platform.
No.
And, I don't
No.
like the lighting on that picture, so I can't
Sure.
go. It's like, I feel like people were more open and adventurous. You know what I mean? It's funny, one of the couples in the marriage group, the marriage book club that we're a part of, their story is that they met and they got married within 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And, for a couple to do that, it takes a certain level of courage to do that. It takes a certain level of being open, and placing themselves in a place to be able to get to know somebody, a novel thought, right?
Yes.
And that's part of the concern. And I'm all for people protecting themselves, keeping their head on a swivel. There are a lot of crazy people out there. But at the same time, I think some people are missing gifts that are right in front of them because they live in their own thoughts. They live in their own worlds that they concoct. And I feel like they're missing out sometimes.
Let
And
me
I'm
ask
sure
you
some
this.
folks are gonna push back on what I just said, but I'm shooting today.
Let me ask you this. We live in a world that's heavily curated.
Yes.
We consume content when we want to consume it. Those that are watching us
Yes.
now or
They're
listening
consuming
to us
content.
now are doing it on demand. They are not tuning in at a particular date, at a particular time. Everything that is in our social media feeds or what we consume on television. When you and I were young, there was a lineup on television on major networks, and you watched what was in the lineup. You didn't get to curate
Yes.
a playlist.
Absolutely.
Of it was terrestrial radio. There was no playlist of curated music that all I did was like listen to this really, really curated and create this echo chamber around myself. Tell me your thoughts about how that's impacting relationships, though, because if all I do is consume on demand in a very curated way everything around me, how can I then prepare myself to be introduced to a person that may not look the way I think they're going to look, or be from the culture that I think they're going to be from, or the neighborhood that I thought, because you and I could not have curated one another. We're from different parts of the state. We did not, you went to private school, I was a public school kid. Like, we could not have curated one another. Yet in this day and age, most everything is
on demand.
a curated and a construct. So how do those cultural parameters prevent us from developing these really, really meaningful relationships?
Yeah, it's again, it causes us to pause and really consider these things, and I think before any person gets into a relationship and approaches a relationship, they need to know who they are, as far as I'm concerned, as an individual. And again, if you're allowing your curated playlist, your curated content define who you are, you're going to make the decisions that have been made, unfortunately. And I think that is the miscalculation I think that some people make is, again, if you're going to listen to a lot of banter on social media that becomes your algorithm, that is anti-relationship, anti-love, anti-sacrifice, anti the opposite sex, that will become the meditation of your heart. So when you go into the dating field and you have all of this content that's running through your mind that is counteractive to developing a meaningful, loving relationship, you got to work through that. And I think some people are unable to because they don't know what has happened. That's the subtlety of some enemies, right? It sneaks up on you. And before you know you've been compromised, you have been.
Yes.
And now you're coming into that proverbial dating table with all this junk in your head. So I think people need to, again, protect their minds, protect their hearts, protect their ears, and be on the lookout for things, ideologies, thoughts, voices that are trying to suck love out of your whole context, and it's really unfortunate. And I'm even saying that, as a follower of Christ, as devoted disciples of Christ, as devoted followers of Christ, we have to protect our eyes, our minds, and our hearts, because there's a competition for your thoughts. There's a competition for your meditation. And if we're not careful, our conscience, our ethic, our standards will be completely hijacked. So again, when you're sitting there with a red balloon, you're going to pop it because the man or the woman didn't fit this motif in your mind that has been dictated by an algorithm.
And I will say this because you said you should know who you are.
Yes.
And I want to take us back to our much younger selves. You and I
Yeah.
absolutely didn't know who we were.
Yeah, that's true.
At 19 and 21 when we met, nor
Yeah.
were we thinking about marriage. But one thing that we often talk about on this platform is this transitional generational conversation
Yeah.
that we find ourselves in. Because what you and I also had the benefit of was at least a normative idea around marriage and family and relationship. It was the Cosby Show era. That was goals, right?
That's
like that
true.
was
Family
family
goals.
matters, and it was all of these what we consumed
That's true.
on television and what was part of our music
pro-relationship.
and our love songs, and we had Big Luther and
Yeah.
all of those things.
Yeah.
and Lil Luther,
Lil
and,
Luther,
yes,
everything in
and
between.
everything in between. And so, any time that we had that as the image, that was the meditation, of our heart. Now, that is not the
compromised.
image or the desire or part of the conversation or part of even socially the construct that is the goal. And so when we start talking about really having meaningful relationships and meaningful relationships that hopefully will transition into marriage, we're like, like swimming upstream on this conversation.
Yeah.
Now that's not, in the vein, that's really going against the grain. So talk about that shift and talk about some of the challenges in that shift, because we talked about the algorithm and the programming, but it is even outside of what we consume on demand and where our devices, quote unquote, lead us. It is also culturally a part of the norm. Reality TV, we didn't grow up on that. It became something that happened along the way, but just all of those things are not things that we grew up on.
Yeah, that's it's tough, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's part of the challenge, for our viewers and listeners, and people in this, cultural moment is, and some of us have watched these documentaries on the influence of social media.
Yes.
Right? How you're basically put on a string and they pull you in all these different directions. And for us, as being our big age, we know life before social media.
Yes.
So we can counterbalance the algorithm, what we know to be true, based on our upbringing, based on our lived experience, and based on our faith. Unfortunately, there's some young people that may not have that counterbalance.
No.
And we were talking about that. You remember the sister, I showed you the clip on social media, and she said, this young woman, she had to be probably in her 30s, let's just say 30s, and she said, I can't date a man with a job.
Because why?
And when I picked my mouth off the ground, I'm like, what is she talking about? She says she can't date a man with a job because she's spontaneous. She likes to be able to travel at the drop of a hat, and a man with a job has to take vacation days and more than likely can't afford the spontaneous vacation. And the statement was very uninformed. You and I know some high capacity people in that C-suite or C-suite adjacent
Yes.
that call major shots.
Yes.
That have major resources, that have major access. So to think that any person with a job is not a person of means, that's ill-informed. Secondly, we know entrepreneurs that are 7- and 8-figure people they have very demanding schedules.
Yes.
Sometimes more so than our C-suite
Absolutely.
executive.
Absolutely.
Because they're all in on the business or
Yes.
the business is, so they always up, right? You know what I mean? So it was completely ill-informed, but that young lady's mindset was shaped and fashioned by something or someone.
Yes.
And that's why we're having this conversation, because I feel like people like that are making statements like that, we had to be the adult in the room and bring some correction. You know what I mean? Even to Paul Pierce, iconic player from here in LA, right? The brother needs some help on his relationship mindset and ideology. And secondly, our young adults need to know who's worthy to speak into their lives.
Yes.
Some of these people are not qualified to speak into your life and give you a methodology for relationships. They're not qualified, period. You know, so that's, I mean, it's funny, but it's also critical, because if we fast forward the tape 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years,
Yes.
what is our community going to look like if people are subscribing to these mindsets? And this is a question I have, you know, for you, Jamila, is, you know, some of the research says that Black women as a demographic are some of the the most educated demographic in the United States, and
Sure.
you guys can fact check us on that, but I've heard this stated a number
Sure.
of times. If this room was filled with some of those single educated Black women, what guidance or advice would you give them to get in the dating field and to throw themselves into developing a meaningful relationship? What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's really tough, because to all of the sisters that are watching this, and particularly those that are high capacity sisters that are just doing a ton, and I don't know many that aren't. So let me
Yeah.
just say that I don't know many that aren't. What I would say is that if it is your desire to be in a godly relationship, that we have to put all of our degrees and our history and anything that is concerning us at the foot of the cross. Because what happens is that we are so used to and so accustomed to, and we are good at it. It's part of our Black girl magic.
Yeah.
We are able to make something out of nothing. We are able to come into rooms, to companies, to organizations, and build and develop and curate and do all of these things. But sometimes in that being our superpower in relationships, it could work against us, because we will try to make the wrong thing something,
The right thing.
We try to make the wrong thing the right thing.
There go a tip jar.
Yes.
That's a tip jar moment.
That part.
Don't make the wrong thing the right thing.
Or don't try to.
Come
so
on.
we might pick the wrong individual because on paper, he got the right resume or the right pedigree or all of those things, and we will try to make that into something that is not. So meanwhile, the brother that, and we talk about this all the time, the sisters that are like, I don't want to date a brother that's blue collar worker. I don't want to date a brother. Man, again, some of the best individuals, because we have these things that are kind of in our mind. We have been programmed as Black women in many cases, not given a soft place to land and not given a place where we feel safe. And so oftentimes that comes out as this really hard exterior that, Black women are angry or, are got to stand up and do this and do that. And a lot of it is because there just aren't a ton of places where we are celebrated, taken care of, and given a space to quote unquote be in our soft girl era. And so when you are trying to be in a relationship with someone, that's something that, you're going to have to put down for the right person and in the right way. And that's difficult. That's difficult because that's been much of our armor, much of our protection, and much of the way that we've been able to function. And quite frankly, too, we have to really, and I would say this for the men and for the women, as you were talking, it was, what are we celebrating? And where are we finding our mentors? Just because someone is our business mentor doesn't mean they should be our relationship mentor.
Boy.
Or just
Absolutely.
because we applaud what they're able to do on the court or on the field doesn't mean they should be the person to speak into our life concerning relationships.
Absolutely.
And so I think too, it just becomes so important with, and you said it, and I don't want to gloss over it, who we allow to speak into our lives, who we allow to take direction from, because you don't want to take direction or guidance from someone who you don't want to trade places with. If that person has all the money and resources and all the things, but they can't hold down a relationship longer than 6 months or longer than a year, man, I'm not trying to trade places with you. I might need to go talk to this sister or this brother over here that's been with somebody for 10, 15, 20, 30 years beyond, and learn what they have to tell me about that. Because you will find your mentors and you will find people you can glean from just in a ton of different places. It isn't always the person that gets celebrated in one capacity, and that's the difficulty with the Cam Newtons and the Nick Cannons and the and the and the Paul Pierces, and there's
great athletes.
They're so wonderful.
I mean,
wonderful. Listen, you did your big one, and Hall of Famers and all those things. But that doesn't mean that you in the next breath are in position to counsel me in this area. Right. So again, because somebody, we can name them down the line. Just because someone has a high level of proficiency in one area doesn't mean that they are the same person.
Absolutely.
But that's the danger. We celebrate, again, certain things. We applaud celebrity. We celebrate people that have a ton of money, and we see and place value, all-encompassing value in those things. But when it comes down to some of those character and integrity pieces, when it comes down to the piece of, well, how did you transition from being a single mother or not having a father figure in the home, and then becoming a great dad, or then becoming a great spouse when maybe you didn't see it? We're not asking those questions to one another, because there's some people that did that. How did you blend your families? And gosh, you were a young parent. How did you then mature and have those conversations along the way? I mean, we just don't talk about people that were successful in doing some of these very difficult and nuanced relationship building pieces. And so when we talk about trying to create our love stories with one another, we just are kind of missing the mark with it, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely. And it's, and I think the conversation, right, that you're able to curate and, peel back those layers and really try and get into, people's fears, people's concerns, some of their prejudice, some of their biases, some of the information that's ill-informed. I feel like it's in those moments, right, that we can see, some things change.
Yes.
And another thing that, like when I'm having these conversations with young men, the same thing is, what I try and help them understand is that you will never become your best self without somebody placing a demand on you. So again, and unfortunately, some of these famous people we're listening to, they've never been in that arena of a devoted marriage, and they've never become their best selves. So sometimes what we hear is a fraction of their potential. And I'm talking about the most famous.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
But again, if you've been gallivanting and doing your thing and, you know, being a baby daddy and all this, it's fine. Pay your child support, but please understand there is a higher level that they're missing out on in their manhood. You know what I mean? And I think the same can be said, you know, for the young women, the young ladies, right? Because, and I think, you know, unfortunately, some of these people, they have watched some people go through hardship and struggles within the confines of marriage. It's like, well, who wants that? You know, and it's like, yeah, there are struggles, there's sacrifices. You know, sometimes you may feel like it's 60-40, you know, it's 80-20, but at the end of the day, it needs to be 100-100, right? Everybody needs to be kind of all chips in for this greater good of the marriage and for the greater good of the family. And then kids come along for the greater good of the children, right? But, you know, I feel like we just have some work to do to make a literal defense for the sanctity of marriage. You know, one of the, you know, conversations that are happening in some men camps right now is that, you know, marriage, it's a bad contract, you know, and that's how some men are thinking about marriage, not until death do we part. They're thinking about it from a monetary. If this don't work out, I'm gonna lose X amount of dollars, and that's gonna set me back X amount of years to get back on my feet. I don't want that, you know. And it's like, wow, that's where we are, right? But to bring some of those men back to the negotiating table or the closing table for marriage, we got to have some conversations. You know, and to be honest, Jamila, I honestly think part of this platform is going to be that negotiation table.
Well, let me ask you, because there's just a ton of voices. And Kevin Samuels, God rest his soul, had a lot to say. And there's just so many people that have a ton to say. There's these terms out there, high net worth individual and high vibrate. We talking about vibrations and frequencies. And I said, what is all this language? There I go with my Gen X self. A frequency. What mean you? What mean you? What meaneth these things? So it's all this noise. So if I have a desire to be in a meaningful relationship, if I have a desire to really want to position myself to pursue marriage, but it's all of this noise and it's all of these voices, the voices that are, again, voices I consume externally, and quite frankly, voices of my loved ones and my family members and my parents who experienced divorce and just kind of couldn't get it right at home, or within the context of my family, there's a certain culture because divorce can be generational and being single parents and things of that nature. So there's just some things that are voices that can just be so hard to shift through. How can you encourage someone or give someone tools, tips, or nuggets to quiet some of those voices?
And we're gonna land the plane, but I'm gonna get these nuggets.
Well, give the nuggets for you land the plane.
And we're gonna land the plane. I think number one, any person that's desiring a marriage or a meaningful relationship, there is nothing preventing them from doing the self-work, right? Because the self-work means that you're preparing yourself to enter into this arena. The self-work is, you know, again, checking your mind, checking your heart. You know, what issues, what thoughts, what past trauma may hinder them from being able to enter into the dating field, let alone hold down a responsible relationship. See, that's the thing. We don't need to wait until you get there to do the work. You can do the work now, right? So that means investing in some good books, some coaching, some training, some therapy, some counseling, some conferences. Again, get yourself right. And this is what you and I know, Jamila. We know marriages always go better when two whole people enter into the marriage.
Yes.
It takes time, it takes an investment to get whole sometimes.
Right.
And the truth of the matter is, the older we get, the more we go through life,
Yes.
there's more life happening that's
Absolutely.
chipping away at our wholeness.
Absolutely.
So I think that is what I would say first. Do the work. Again, you got these professional ball players. You think about the level of training, the level of preseason training that they all go through
Yes.
to get prepared for the season. Even with all of that optimum training, they could still blow out an Achilles in a playoff game.
Yes.
How do we look not preparing? It makes absolutely no sense. So again, there's preparation that can be done. Some of the preparation may be listening to conversations like this.
Yes.
Because the self-work will help you understand, why do I think the way I think? Why do I have fears in different areas of my life in this area? Why do I have anxiety? Why do I not want to take the Starbucks conversation date? Because I'm afraid of
Scared
placing
to go have a cup of coffee.
Scared to have so again, I
Yes.
feel like the first step is do the self-work. Do the personal work. Get in that gym and work out the matters of the mind,
Yes.
matters, especially the older you get.
Yes.
When you're 19, 20, 21, 22, under 25, you're still developing. The truth of the matter, you're
Right.
still growing,
Absolutely.
right? So I
Absolutely.
think that age demographic, they also need to protect their minds and hearts to make sure, I can't listen to everything.
No.
They got to know, hey, is this hurting or harming the development of my own mental, mind,
Yes.
spirit, soul, body, you know what I
Yes.
mean? So they need to, protect, and they need to do work as well. But for those that are a little up in age, they can start doing the self-work. And this is what you and I know, and I'm going to close here. As you deal with, I don't know why I keep hitting this thing. If you do the personal work, if you start to deal with the matters of your mind and your heart, it'll change your vision. It'll change how you perceive people. Part of the problem is people's visions and perceptions are off because of all the junk they got in their mind and their heart. You can't see straight if you're carrying all this baggage and weight. So, and again, if you go into the dating field with all this baggage and weight, you're going to forfeit opportunities. So that's where I would say it. We got a whole lot more to say, but that's, I think, where people can start. Everybody can start there, dealing with their heart, dealing with their mind.
Well, thank you, Rufus. Dealing with your heart and mind.
Absolutely.
Just start there. It has been another With Love Wednesday, and we are so excited that you have joined us every single week right here on your social media platform of choice. Please do us a favor and share this content with your loved ones. Share this with someone that you want to extend a meaningful relationship with, so that you can continue this conversation with them and hopefully spark up some of this discussion at home. We love to hear from you, hear your ideas and your questions that will help drive our conversations moving forward. So we invite you to connect with us again on social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to you tuning in and listening next Wednesday.
This episode of With Love the Chambers is brought to you by the Vision Engineering Collective, where purpose meets precision. Whether you're launching a bold initiative, scaling your organization, or navigating complex projects, their team brings over 25 years of expertise in project management, strategic planning, and vision execution across sectors like tech, healthcare, education, and nonprofit. Ready to turn your vision into reality? Visit www.thevcollective.info to learn more.
That's a wrap for today's episode of With Love the Chambers.
We hope you laughed, learned, and felt encouraged along the way.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who needs a little love and wisdom today.
You can also connect with us online on all social media platforms at Rufus Chambers Online and at Jamila Chambers. We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time,
Keep living, keep laughing, and keep learning with love, the Chambers.